in a bid to beat the Independent National Electoral Commission's deadline for the nomination of vice presidential candidates. Some political parties submitted names of vice presidential candidates who they described as placeholders. Reacting to the trend, Festus Okoye, the Commissioner for Information and Voter Education of INEC, who was on this show yesterday, said the placeholder is a unique Nigerian invention for which the Commission's law has no provision. He added that the Commission can only replace a candidate if the person writes a sworn affidavit stating that he's withdrawing from the race within the time frame provided by the law. Joining us on the show this morning, as we continue with the conversation around this method that political parties have adopted to buy time, is Clement Nwankwo. Welcome to the morning show, Clement Nwankwo. Good morning.
Thank you, Dr. Ruben Abati. Good morning.
Yes, thank you very much, Clement, for honoring our invitation. Well, let me ask you, what is this thing about placeholders? We have raised a question here on this program that we are surprised that a man will say he wants to be a president of Nigeria, pay 100 million, pay 40 million, buy delegates, as we have seen, and then, he will have no idea who will be his running mate when he should know that Section 142 of the Constitution makes it very clear that for you to be president or for you to be whatever, you must have a running mate. What do you think is responsible for this? And do you think that most of these presidential candidates are running a risk?
Yeah, again, good morning, Ruben, Tundun, and Rufai. You make the point quite clear. Section 142 of the Nigerian Constitution only completes the ticket when you do have a president and a vice president. So for you to complete your journey as a candidate for a political party registered in Nigeria, ready to contest for elections, you must have a vice nominee. The same also would apply to governorship candidates. They must have a deputy governorship candidate. Once you have that, then you've crossed the first hurdle. Regarding the question whether a candidate may withdraw or not, that is covered clearly within the Electoral Act. But yes, I do agree with you, and I do agree with Festus Okoye. It's a Nigerian invention, placeholder. I haven't had that before. I'm only just hearing that with respect to elections in the last couple of days. And I think that it must be very clear that this is nothing that is under or recognized under the Electoral Act. Once someone has been placed as a candidate or vice candidate, whether it's vice president or deputy governor, then he is on the ballot already. And INEC has responsibility in the Electoral Act. When you look at the Electoral Act, INEC then has responsibility under Section 32, subsection 1, to publish these names within 150 days. There are circumstances under which these names that have been submitted to INEC may be changed, or INEC may change it, and this should not be assumed or taken for levity by the parties that this is an assumption that they can carry out without fulfilling those conditions. If a candidate were to decide not to become a vice candidate or running mate, then he must withdraw himself under the Constitution and under the Electoral Act and fulfill the conditions for this as described in Section 31 of the Electoral Act. And that includes that he must put this down in writing, sign it, and deliver it to the political party that nominated him. Once this is done, and he must deliver it personally, so it wouldn't be a case of someone being nominated as a running mate who decides as a condition for accepting to be a running mate, or the party deciding that for him to be a running mate, he must pre-sign a resignation. No, he must put this in writing. He must deliver it by himself to the political party to show voluntariness. So I think that if you were to put in a candidate's name and he decides that he doesn't also know what placeholder means and that he's been nominated and his name submitted to INEC, and INEC, which has an obligation to publish this name 150 days before the date set for election, which would be equivalent to about 5 months, then if he decides that he's not withdrawing, there's nothing any political party can do about it. And we've seen that with respect to so-called placeholders in the legislative elections that were recently held. We've seen reports of some of those who were asked to go and stand in for someone while they pursue other ambitions, decide that they didn't want to give up that place. So those are possibilities within the contemplation of politics that the political parties need to be aware of.
Well, thank you, sir. Yes, it could so easily backfire. So can you give us some insights, if you can, about the rationale? Why are we seeing this placeholder system, and why in this particular election? What exactly is going on here, since it's been established that the vice president is neither an appendage nor an afterthought? What does this say about the current electoral cycle that we're in?
Thank you, Tudun. Your point is, in fact, re-emphasized in Section 142 of the Constitution, because Section 142 of the Constitution says that any reference to candidates applies equally to the running mate as it does to the actual candidate. So that distinction, and we've seen that, the bifurcation between a candidate and running mates is very, very difficult to make, especially if we, and I know Dr. Ruben Nabati, you did mention that with respect to Bielsa. We saw the consequence of that you have to get the candidates right, and you have to be sure that they both qualify. Otherwise, one could truncate the other. So the constitution is very clear. A reference to the candidates is same. A vice presidential candidate or a deputy governorship candidate has the same description in terms of qualification and status for the purpose of contest or qualification for contest for elections. I would think that these parties are making these because, one, they are still dealing with the internal politics of nominating a deputy or a running mate. They are still dealing with the political calculations of who could best deliver votes to them or assuage the different interests within the parties. But I also think it indicates some failing on the part of the candidate, because the main candidate is nominated by the party in a primaries process. But the Constitution gives the powers of appointing a running mate to the candidate who has emerged from the primaries. And once that candidate has put forward a name, that running mate becomes as equally entrenched as the candidate himself and cannot be changed by the candidate, and is regarded as if he was duly nominated in a political party primaries. This is clear within the Constitution. So I worry that a person who has put forward a name that they call placeholder has not shown sufficient indication that they are in full grasp of participating in elections, have not shown that they are really ready with all of the needs that the office demands. And we did see the consequence of that in 2015 when it took forever, more than 6 months, for the president to appoint his ministers. So I think that when you look at all of this, there must be a readiness on the part of the candidate. It goes to the question and the conversation around what are these issues that these candidates are campaigning to win elections with? What are their manifestos? What are their specific concerns? You raised in the earlier program concerns about living costs, and that's a major issue across the world today. But Nigeria, you talked about spending 7 trillion naira, which is almost half of the national budget, to subsidize fuel. And you do know that the budget is already operating on a deficit, meaning that you might even be borrowing money to buy fuel and to subsidize fuel in this country. So the candidates really must show readiness to run, and that readiness to run, that readiness to campaign, that readiness to win elections and to govern begins to manifest when you show that you have decided, you are very decisive on who your running mate is and what you are bringing to the table. Placeholding a deputy or a running mate, to me, indicates some of the weaknesses of the Nigerian politics that we've been really bedeviled with in recent years.
The scary part is the fact that most of the candidates are placeholding. What does that say about our democracy? Isn't 2020 elections fast becoming another joke?
Rufai, I hope it's not becoming another joke, because this country has suffered in very recent years, and this country cannot afford another period of what we have recently gone through, or indeed going through. So I think that the citizens are watching, and when you look around and you see people anxious and queuing and squabbling and struggling to get registered, there's a sense in which you get a feeling that citizens want to make a decision with the forthcoming elections. And I think a political party that is not prepared to confront the anger, the failure of our system that citizens are experiencing, a political party that is not prepared for this and not prepared for the elections may indeed pay the price. And we have seen with the recent Electoral Act, and that's why you are seeing even the whole term about placeholding, that parties are beginning to understand that process must take place. The elections is looking very likely that it would go well in terms of process, and civil society groups are very well prepared and preparing to keep an eye on the elections. So certainly if a political party is not showing seriousness, then it means that it would prepare to pay the price for it.
Okay, Clement. Okay, let's take on another contemporary issue. The recent election, gubernatorial election in Ekiti. You have been monitoring elections long before some of the current observers were born. But some of the reports we have been very positive about INEC's performance. CDD says, for example, that, look, we have seen an improvement in terms of election management. Yaga Africa also commended INEC. But do you think we can, on the basis of this off-cycle election in Ekiti, say, oh, truly, INEC is ready for 2023? Or this is likely to just be a one-off, performance? What's your assessment, and what will you be telling INEC to pay attention to going forward?
Thank you, Ruben. I did follow closely the elections as part of the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, and the situation was present and on ground in Ekiti. I think most of the reports from the election observers, whether it is Nigerian observers or indeed international observers that were in Ekiti, was positive regarding the process. The issues surrounding the process is, however, still a major concern. And you did see the terminologies, and it looks like we develop new terminologies all the time. In local parlance, what was going on in Ekiti with vote buying. I think that's a major concern, and when we put that side by side with the cost of the nomination process, including cost of buying forms and cost of paying delegates, then you get worried about the elections and the possibility that money would be a major concern. In terms of the actual process, I think everyone is satisfied that INEC has come quite some long way, especially given recent experience in the FCT and in the Anambra State governorship elections. That the INEC has come some way in terms of improving on its process, whether it's the BVAS system or the conduct of its officials, and INEC has come quite some way. But there were still instances, there were still cases where you did have glitches with BVAS, and you can very easily have an election which is one unit election in one state, where all the resources available are deployed to make it glitch-free, and so get a very good result from that in terms of a call on the process. But when you do have, and we're preparing for a Nigeria general elections in February and March of 2023, then we all want to see INEC step up its game and ensure that the same way that it has improved significantly its process of conducting elections in Ekiti, that this translates to a national widespread improvement. We're still keeping our fingers crossed, and I think that Nigerians need to continue to commend INEC, but also need to interrogate INEC on its preparations on avoiding some of these glitches. And you did see, and I think that that's what you see with the Electoral Act and improvements in the Electoral Act, that INEC is able to upload election results. Each time we have elections in this country, we have always, and this is since the elections that were held in 1999, we've always said, look, there are serious problems with collation of results. And in the last two elections, we did point out that indeed the collation process is the weakest link with the elections. But what we have seen with the new Electoral Act is that collation has improved significantly, and that the transmission of results from the polling units has helped to improve the collation process. When this is going on a national level, then there is going to be a huge interrogation of that transmission process. And we want to be sure that the improved use of technology is a Nigeria-wide improvement and application. We don't want to see technology applied in Ekiti State, but not applied in any other state that is described as incapable of having those infrastructures. And we know that INEC, during the debate about the transmission of results, did release data and evidence from the Communications Commission that showed that the country has, as at the elections before, in 2018, just before the 2019 elections, INEC had more than 98% coverage of the country. We don't want to come back in 2023 and be told that that 98% had decreased. And we did see the NCC come to the National Assembly to testify evidence and give evidence, reducing the number 98% to 51% or even less than that. That would be a huge disservice to this country. So my hope is that if it was in 2018, 98% coverage, that by 2023, it will be 100% coverage, of course, with additional resources to deploy where there are shortfalls. But certainly, I do hope that the improvements in technology is what INEC holds out going forward to 2023, and that this applies nationwide, and that the collation process will stop being a weak link in our election conduct in Nigeria.
All right.
I have a question. What's your assessment of the Electoral Act so far? You recall how important that amendment was, what a huge part of President Muhammadu Buhari's legacy it's going to be. Now that we've had primaries, we've had one election at least, well, apart from the area council elections back in February, we've had one gubernatorial elections in Ekiti. What's your assessment so far? And including the fact that it was really quite a bloody primaries, considering the huge overlap now with the National Assembly. So many senators and House of Representative members will not be returning. How do you think it's faring so far, that act?
I think so far, of course, there are still gaps in the Electoral Act, and we did see that when the debate arose as to leaving out statutory delegates and so on. And hopefully we take lessons from the elections and go forward with the next elections. But certainly I think that when you look at the Electoral Act, you can see very clearly that there are huge improvements. What we want to see, and we didn't see that in Ekiti, but in the 2019 general elections, we were all very worried about the role of the security. We saw the DSS, we saw the Nigerian army, we saw the different arms of security units being deployed in ways that raised concerns for us. And I think we didn't see that in Ekiti. We did see very good conduct on the part of security personnel. We hope that the lessons from Ekiti translates to the general elections, and that the security services understand that their role in the elections is as defined by INEC, and that they have no business deploying when INEC has not asked for their deployment. They have no business interfering with the citizens' ability to go out and vote. They have no business intimidating citizens who want to come out and vote. So going towards 2023, that would be something to keep an eye on. One, the collation process. Two, the process itself, including use of the new technology, BVAS, and transmission of results that the new Electoral Act has introduced. But also really the entire conduct of elections and the conduct of the security services with respect to the elections in 2023. But certainly, I think Ekiti is a good indication. We still have Osun governorship elections to go, and we are going to, hopefully, if Osun improves even more on Ekiti, then we are all hopeful looking towards the elections in 2023. But I must add, Tundu, the point you make about the attrition rate in the National Assembly. The National Assembly does have a huge challenge with the level of attrition, old members not returning. I know that a lot of Nigerians have their views about National Assembly, some not very complimentary, but from several years of work with legislators at both national and state level, I think it's always helpful to the democratic process to have as many experienced members of the legislature come back to continue the business of legislating. Otherwise, you would find that if you do have, and we have had in this country, more than 75% attrition of old legislators not coming back into the new parliament. If that happens, I think it's going to be a huge tasking of the duty and responsibility of training new members and getting them to get to speed with the legislative process. Sometimes that takes almost half of the entire legislative session.
Very much, Clement Nwankwo, for joining us on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed.